Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the CannabizMD webinar on Innovation or Danger, Hemp-Derived Cannabinoids and Delta-8. I'm Jacquie Cohen Roth, CannabizMD and TPAD founder and CEO. Very excited to have everybody join tonight. We have folks that are joining us. It's very exciting from across the US. In states where there isn't a medical cannabis program in place, which is particularly important for this conversation, that they have an understanding of Delta-8 because of its availability across the US. We also have somebody joining us from Australia this evening. And I always ask Australians, how's my tomorrow? Again, excited to have you here. A bit about CannabizMD. CannabizMD, I got off the ground in 2017 with essentially a focus to help fill the void of cannabis science and policy. We do this by providing education, educating and building and engaging our ecosystem for optimal patient outcomes. We execute this and our mission through webinars like tonight, through a annual forum that you're going to be hearing about at the end of the discussion, consulting for our clients, and obviously the discussion that we're going to be starting in just a few moments. Our goal for today's webinar and every webinar, whatever your role is in the cannabis industry, is that you come away with something new, an appreciation for medical cannabis, science and therapeutics, a new idea of your own, a fresh perspective, or even a new strategy. During this webinar, we're going to be discussing hemp-derived cannabinoids and Delta-8, including what Delta-8 is and how it is disrupting the cannabis and hemp industry. At the very beginning, before I came on screen, we had some keywords and definitions that you're going to see in the chat to refer to. So we have a variety of our spectrum of knowledge joining us tonight, folks that are actually in the cannabinoid space to patients and consumers that are exploring medical cannabis and its therapeutic benefits. New Frontier Data, one of my favorite resources for data, reports that there's a 53% decline in Delta-8 price per kilogram year over year from May of 21 to May of 22. So a significant decline in price, which I consider, and we'll talk about it, is a possible danger, is that there's this biomass that's going to be coming on the market. And particularly Delta-8, you're going to hear about some other cannabinoids, Delta-9, Delta-10, that could be harmful to consumers, but also there may be some therapeutic benefit. From a legal perspective, Delta-8 is in a gray area and is challenging the industry of what is legal at the federal level and at the state level, and you're going to be hearing about that as well. From a healthcare provider perspective, it can be a therapeutic option for patients, but many don't know about it or understand the difference between Delta-8 and 9 and 10, and the more prominent cannabinoid Delta-9, THC, that does have the psychotropic effects. From a consumer perspective, Delta-8 has exploded on the scene as a legal hemp-based product that is sold everywhere, including your gas station, but with very little oversight or quality testing standards. From a cannabis industry perspective, is this an opportunity for innovation, for new research or product development, creation of industry best standards? Absolutely. Or is it a threat? So a couple of hemp-derived cannabinoids, are they a danger or an innovation? Or both? In just a couple of minutes, our industry experts, I'll be launching that conversation with them that we're going to have for about 45 minutes. We're going to have the chat ongoing that my colleague Steve Landit, who you're going to hear from in just a moment, in that chat. And then from that, Steve's going to pull the most intriguing questions that hopefully we'll have some time to get to several, if not all of them. So note that the webinar is being recorded. So if you're not comfortable with your name appearing or maybe your face at some point, this is not the webinar for you to join. So log off. And now I am delighted to have Steve Landit, my new colleague and very recent graduate from the Masters of Science in Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, where I graduated from, and I'm now an adjunct. So welcome, Steve.
Hey, thanks, Jackie. And hello to everyone who's joined us tonight. And I guess a good evening to Europe and that good morning or good day to Australia. This audience and having everybody join this just reinforces what an important topic this is. So thank you, for the interest in joining us. And as Jackie said, part of the mission for us at CannabizMD is to build an ecosystem where we can share knowledge and connect people. So particularly on important topics like tonight. So everybody from providers and physicians to business people to just consumers who are curious and want to know a little more. One thing I want to let you know is that my focus at CannabizMD is to grow our partnerships within the cannabis industry. And it's to deliver our foundations program, which is a custom executive education for companies and their management team. Because we know that when companies invest in their senior leadership with education, they are more likely to hit their strategic goals. So if any of you out there have a company or are interested in the foundation program, I have to say, please contact me. I'll have my information at the end of the webinar. All right, so now on to some important housekeeping. We're going to have some really good conversations going. You should have some questions. Please formulate them and put them in the chat. And as Jackie said, I'm going to do my best to get the best. And ideally, I'd like to be able to get to all of them. So please put them in the chat where you'll also find some of the documents Jackie mentioned earlier. So thanks again. And Jackie, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So let's see. So we have Dr. Matthew Mintz joining us. If you'd come on screen, Matthew Schweber and Dr. Linda Klumpers, if you would, folks, please come on screen. And we are very eager to get our discussion launched. Let's see, Matthew Mintz and Dr. Mintz and Matt Schweber.
I am not able to.
Yeah, I have the same problem. It says that the camera is disabled by the host.
Okay. Let's see, Milan, behind the scenes, if she would help get us going. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, welcome. So let's see, going to me around the clock, I see Dr. Mintz first. I'm going to briefly give some background how I know each of these cannabis industry experts, and then each of you, if you would give a brief intro of what you're doing and what brought you to the cannabis industry. So, Dr. Mintz, I met via a quote of his that I found when I was doing some research for a couple of programs that I had delivered, focused on the serious lack of endocannabinoid science, cannabis science, particularly for physicians in the US. And Dr. Mintz had a quote, something to the degree of that it's backwards, that US physicians are gaining their cannabis knowledge from dispensary attendants. So welcome, Dr. Mintz. Excited to have you here join us tonight.
Yes, thank you. And so my name is Dr. Matthew Mintz. I'm an internal medicine primary care physician. Been in practice for almost 25 years. Most of that time was at the George Washington University, where I was full-time faculty. Despite doing what some people consider as alternative medicine, I do pretty much most of what I do is traditional internal medicine, primary care, physicals, diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol. That's most of what I do. About 5 years ago, I left my full-time position at GW and started my own practice. And the way I got involved in medical cannabis, as my practice was slowly getting started, a dispensary moved into my medical building. And so that's how I got introduced. It was something that I wasn't too busy and decided to try. But when I saw the effects that patients were getting, I realized this was something that I really wanted to incorporate in my practice. As a physician, that's what we want to do. We want to make patients feel better. And this was what I thought to be a very safe product, helping a lot of people who had tried a lot of different things and nothing had worked. So that's how I got involved in medical cannabis. And to that quote, I thought it was very hard as a academic physician not to be able to get up-to-date information. I found was very difficult and peculiar, and had to spend my own time doing my own research and taking courses where I could find them to sort of get up to speed on medical cannabis and how to provide it as a clinician. So, and I spent so much time not doing that, I actually wrote a book about it. So, but I'm very pleased to be here. I'm looking forward to this very interesting discussion.
Great, thank you, Dr. Mintz, and Dr. Klumpers. Dr. Linda Klumpers, who we met at a medical cannabis conference in Malta in 2019. And I was so thoroughly impressed by the presentation of Dr. Klumpers that she took some very complex concepts and science, and I understood it. And I was particularly excited because it was in my first year of graduate school. So I actually picked up on some knowledge there as well. And then Dr. Klumpers has been on a panel of where our focus was on medical cannabis treating chronic pain. And then spot on is she recently published a paper comparing Delta-8 THC and Delta-9 THC research. So welcome, Dr. Klumpers. Very excited to have you join us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I just saw Steve asking for questions in the chat. I'm also looking forward to seeing what people have to ask, because of course this is virtual, can't see them in person. So a bit about my background. I am a clinical pharmacologist. I did my PhD in the clinical pharmacology of cannabinoids. So I've been working in cannabinoids for about 16 years, I think now. And I work as a partner with Verdian Science. That is a company that helps other companies with all kinds of pharmacology questions. Drug development is what we do mostly. Then I have an education platform called Cannabis, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Vermont. And next to that, I do some other advising for companies as well that have exciting drugs that they're developing. So I'm actively involved in various clinical studies. You're mentioning the webinar with chronic pain. That was right after I got this grant to study chronic pain. And now it's really actual that you are doing a Delta-8 webinar, because just together with Dr. Michael Tagan wrote a review about the pharmacology on that. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited to have you join. And Matthew Schweber, who I met through the Council for Federal Cannabis Regulation, a 501c3 focused on ensuring safe and terrific regulation that the industry really needs before, anyway, for best practices across the board. But in any event, Matt is a cannabis attorney based in New York. And if you would share more about what your practice is, Matt, welcome.
Sure. It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me here. I'm an attorney at a cannabis law firm by the name of Feuerstein and Kulik. We're located in New York. Our firm has grown over the past 5 years from 4 lawyers into 30 lawyers. We practice, we have 4 practices. We have a corporate M&A practice, we have a litigation practice, we have a regulatory practice, and we have a debt practice. I personally got involved in cannabis back in really 10 years ago. I was at that time, I come from a traditional corporate law pedigree, much to my chagrin, and I had a very persistent client who decided that he was going to move to San Francisco and buy and sell real estate in the Bayview section, and didn't do particularly well. And he called me one day and he asked me whether or not he could grow marijuana legally in California. And I said, I have no idea. When every lawyer's reaction when they get a question that they can't answer is, let me refer it out to somebody who knows the answer. And he persisted and said, no, I want you to do it. And this went back and forth. I have to tell you, I was a little queasy about the assignment at first. But finally, I think he called me one day and said, I just wired you $10,000, go to work.
Wow.
So I didn't have a choice. I ended up doing some research and I found it fascinating. And I'd like to tell you that I knew in 2012 that it was going to be a vibrant industry. I did not. It was it was a novelty of my practice for a very long time. In 2015, it started to pick up and I got some prestigious clients who wanted me to do the same thing. And then I joined Feuerstein Kulik in 2017.
Yeah, it is a rocket ship. This industry,
yes.
Jumping on board a rocket ship. So ready to get the conversation going. So I'm going to set the table, the foundation of what we're speaking about tonight. So Each of you bring a unique perspective to the conversation. And so Dr. Mintz, as the physician who has the practice again, so there are some key points that to get across about a physician and patient confidentiality when they're talking about medical cannabis, whether it's adult use, recreational use, medical use, what have you, Delta-8, and then the difference between prescribing and recommending. And some
we'll start with the prescribing versus recommending, because that's a little bit easier. So there's because I'm certified in the state of Maryland and the District of Columbia to certify patients for medical cannabis. People always ask about a prescription, and it's not a prescribable thing. So a prescription is something for an FDA approved drug that a doctor gives to the patient or to the pharmacy, and it instructs exactly what they're supposed to take. If I write a prescription for a cholesterol like Crestor and the patient goes to the pharmacist can't just change it to Lipitor. They have to fill it, and the only thing they can change is if there's a generic that is available, they're allowed to do that. So that's what a prescription is, and cannabis doesn't fall under sort of the FDA's purview, really. It's because it's controlled by the states. It's not. So what providers do for medical cannabis is they can do certification. So in other words, the certification, basically I'm giving my medical opinion that the patient meets the state's criteria that then allows them to go into a dispensary. Now, that being said, so that's certification. There's also recommendation. So not only do I certify patients, but I give them specific recommendations about what to get, where to get it, how to take it, et cetera. As far as Delta-8 and at least hemp-derived Delta-9, hemp is not regulated by the FDA. Even though it's legal everywhere according to the Farm Bill. So it's another thing. So you can't prescribe hemp-based CBD, hemp-based Delta-8, hemp-based Delta-9, but I can recommend it just like I would recommend vitamin C or vitamin D or anything like that. And so I do give recommendations for that, as long as, including, where to get it, how to take it, whatever. I wouldn't recommend that patients get a multivitamin from the gas station and they should probably go to GNC or CVS. I might give a recommendation of where to get Delta-8 or Delta-9 if I thought that they should use it. So that's the difference between certification, prescription, recommendation. As far as confidentiality, there's a lot of concerns about patients for medical cannabis because they have to register for this. I'm not knowledgeable about all the laws in all the states, but in general, because it's a state thing, even if you register online, that database is separate from federal and other databases. So your state police shouldn't have access to that. The federal government shouldn't have access to that. It's really a secure, private database that only the doctor and the folks at the dispensary really have access to. And so and again, nothing is, as we now know, there's nothing secure in this world completely. They've been banks that have been breached and things like that. But other than those kind of things that we're seeing, you should not have to worry, that the local government or the federal government is going to find out that you're certified for medical cannabis.
And what a great transition to the attorney before we get into the chemistry. So Matt, if you would provide a bit of a background on what the issue is with the FDA, the positioning of where hemp is legal or not, and then touch on this May 22nd, 9th Circuit Court ruling, and take it from there. Let's start.
Sure. I'd be happy to give you some background. And I think it's really important for everyone listening to understand the origin of this dichotomy between cannabis and hemp, which is somewhat artificial, but nonetheless, as probably you are aware, the Controlled Substances Act chose, rather than identifying the individual compounds in the plant, what they did was they completely banned the plant itself, except for limited exceptions that did not contain any psychologically active substances. What the hemp bill did, which is the Agricultural Improvement Act, there were two versions of the hemp bill. There was a farm bill passed in 2014, which began the process of the distribution, the extraction and distribution of CBD in the country. But really the farm bill that's of significance that should talk about tonight is the one that was passed in 2018. And it was an effort to remove hemp from the ambit of the Controlled Substances Act, to legalize hemp, because for a very long time, cannabis and hemp, they're difficult to differentiate. And for a very long time, the federal government said that they didn't want to have to differentiate between the two, so they banned them both categorically. And as we know, hemp is an incredible source of a whole bunch of industrial goods, and probably should not have been banned in the first place. So in 2018, the Agricultural Improvement Act tried to define hemp in a way that did not include psychoactive substances. The problem is they didn't do a very good job. I'm going to read you a quick definition. It says that hemp means the cannabis sativa plant and any parts of the plant, including the seeds hereof, and all derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, isomers, acids, salts, and salts of isomers, whether growing or not, with a Delta-9 THC concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. And we can get into the specifics. I want Linda to explain to everyone what exactly the difference is between Delta-8 and Delta-9. But suffice it to say, what this did was it very clearly removed plants containing a particular concentration of Delta-9. Now, what Congress didn't account for is that there are other psychotropic substances, cannabinoids, in the cannabis plant apart from Delta-9. This kind of limited definition creates the ambiguity concerning Delta-8, whether or not Delta-8 is or is not a derivative of the cannabis plant, and whether or not it's encompassed by this hemp exception in the Agricultural Improvement Act. I'm happy to go on further, but I thought maybe that Linda might want to explain, and then you can come back to me and I can talk about the Ninth Circuit opinion.
Great, thank you. And my understanding is just a side note is that this 0.3% is very arbitrary. And and so in other countries,
it's somewhat arbitrary. Look, the idea was it's almost impossible to eliminate Delta-9 THC because there are even trace amounts of it in what you and I conceive of as hemp. It comes from some court decisions in the early part of the 2010s when the courts were struggling with the fact that there were a whole array of products that industrial products, even very often conventional over-the-counter products that had hemp in them, and as a consequence of having hemp in them or hemp extract in them, also had trace elements of THC. So yes, it is arbitrary. In Europe, if I'm not mistaken, they use an even lower standard to differentiate between psychoactive substance, psychoactive cannabis, and non-psychoactive hemp. But you're absolutely right; it is arbitrary.
Yeah, I think I saw in Italy it's 2%. So Linda, yes, please. And if I think if we bring on that screen where we have the chemical structures and share that, and Linda, you are, just want to make sure you're off mute. So
yeah, of course. So what is the difference between Delta-9 and Delta-8 THC? Let's start then indeed with the chemical structure. They are isomers of each other. They have exactly the same atoms. They have exactly the same molecular weight. Everything's the same. But what you see here on the screen, if you look at the purple arrow, is that there is one difference, and that is where the double bond is placed of that ring on the left upper side. So all these carbon atoms that make those rings, they are numbered. And in the numbering system on the left hand side in Delta-9 THC, the double bond is between the 9th and the 10th carbon atom, and for Delta-8 it's between the 8th and the 9th carbon atom. And that difference, what does that do? That is actually what I think we'll be talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. And then also on the right hand side, you see a third image because you mentioned Delta-10 before as well. And there you see indeed that the double bond is between two different carbon atoms. So that is the only difference structurally.
Right, and it gets confusing. Thank you so much for that, and for our basic cannabis chemistry. Is that there is also now hemp-derived Delta-9.
Yes.
Yes.
I actually think that's a really good one for Matthew Schweber probably. So what we did not see here is the cannabidiol atom, but Delta-8, and that is why there's so much buzz around this. So Delta-8 can be made from cannabidiol. So manufacturers think, oh, if we are not allowed to sell Delta-9 THC, then from hemp, which is legal, we can take the CBD and turn it into Delta-8. And then we have this psychoactive, or actually intoxicating, however you want to say this, substance that we legally made from a hemp plant. Depending on the level of acidity that you use in the cyclization of this, in the process of making Delta-8 from CBD, you can also make Delta-9 THC. So that is very well possible.
Yeah, it's I find this fascinating, and it is chemistry, and if it's done right and with the best standards. Curious about Delta-8 and showing up in the body. So it's getting, this is an alternative where folks are taking it, using it because they're, one, about it has less than psychotropic effect. Reports, my understanding, I've not used it, is that it does have the euphoric effects of Delta-9 THC from the cannabis marijuana plant. And so then does it show up in the body, and as it goes through the processes in the body metabolism, is that an issue for drug testing? So Dr. Mintz, if you just briefly explain and share about the processes of the metabolism and what happens to in the body. And you're on mute.
Very briefly, when your body ingests anything, especially something like a medication, it gets metabolized usually by the liver and broken down for basically use and elimination. And so there are what are called metabolites, which are breakdown products of the original product. That's true for supplements, it's true for pharmaceutical agents, it's also true for cannabis. And sometimes those metabolites can also have biologically active properties. They stay in the bloodstream based on the properties. So some metabolites are there in the blood and the urine a long time. Some get metabolized very quickly and are only there for a short period of time. Most of the data, and Dr. Klumpers probably can tell a little bit more about this. Most of the data of urine and blood, how long does it last, is on Delta-9. And that's what most drug testers are testing for. Again, it takes weeks for that to sort of get out of the system, depending on what test you're using. So that's something that people need to be aware of. The Delta-8 is very, very new. Well, let's even, before we say Delta-8, as Steve was saying before, there's trace amounts of Delta-9 in CBD. So unless you get a CBD isolate where there's no Delta-9, you can get the Delta-9 in the urine. So, you might be getting what you think is hemp and it's non-psychoactive, but you could show up Delta-9 in a positive test. The similar analogy is the poppy seeds on the bagel testing positive for opioids, and that's a real phenomenon that will happen because these drug tests are so sensitive. Delta-8, it's less clear, but there could be some cross-reactivity, so you have to be really, really careful about that.
Yeah, and it's where the of concern, federal employees, particularly where your practice is, a lot of feds being by NIH, FDA, et cetera. So I think recommendation is be very mindful of the Delta-8 use.
I always ask them, what is their policy
Yeah.
You know, as far they may have a written policy where they're not supposed to use recreational substances, but not everyone is necessarily drug tested. So all federal employees, you know, by policy are not supposed to use cannabis, but not all federal employees are drug tested, but some are. So I usually tell them to talk to HR and find out sort of what the rules are and what they can expect.
Yeah, and then to the science, this is both a legal question and a scientific question. And Matt, I'll start off with you, is that where you and I have spoken about, and for Claire, the legal conversion as a synthetic versus a plant-based cannabinoid. And so plant-based, clarity coming from the cannabis plant.
So, you know, it's interesting because the people who drafted the statute didn't really seem to know a great deal either about the plant or about the chemical processes of extracting cannabinoids, because what they've effectively done is, by calling something a derivative, an extract, or an isomer without really defining it, they created this ambiguity that allowed for Delta-8. I have a very specific opinion about it because I'm also an advocate for the cannabis industry. It seems clear from the legislative language that this was intended to be confined to naturally occurring constituents of the plant. And what's going on, as Linda alluded to earlier, is that there isn't enough Delta-8 naturally occurring in any of these hemp cultivars. So what they're doing is they're stretching the definition of a derivative, and they're taking what's really a derivative, because what they're doing is they're extracting CBD from the plant, and then they're going through a process that Linda can probably describe with greater specificity to convert the CBD into Delta-8, which is, again, a derivative. The unfortunate truth, though, is that this kind of very tortured interpretation of the statute was recently upheld by the Ninth Circuit in an opinion that I vehemently disagree with. The Ninth Circuit did two things. First of all, they said that the only real statutory metric for differentiating cannabis and hemp was the amount of Delta-9 on a dry weight basis. If it's less than 0.3%, it is hemp. If it's greater than 0.3% Delta-9, it is cannabis, that there is no effective distinction between the two. But more importantly, what the language in this case shows is that it's not significant how it's being manufactured, the method of manufacture, that is the synthetic process. It is, however, because the source comes from the hemp plant, the fact that you're converting CBD into Delta-8 is entirely legal. Now, I'll let Linda sort of opine further and sort of elaborate, but I can also explain why I think the Ninth Circuit is wrong.
Linda, take it away, please.
Now, but with regards to the science or the legal or political part,
the science, and then I think Matt made a particular terrific comment about essentially scientists need to be at the table. How these things are, law and policies, regulations are being made without understanding the science. But so if you would, from the scientist perspective, explain this the scientific, the synthetic, the conversion.
Yeah, of course. There's so many things to say right now.
Yes.
So with regards to the conversion, I also saw the double bond question. I must say I am not a chemist, so I cannot go into details on that. But various conditions, including the acidity as well as temperature, define whether the compound that is being created from the CBD is going to be Delta-8 and Delta-9 or Delta-9 THC. Delta-8 is a little bit more stable than Delta-9, but I would actually advise people if they are more interested in really the specifics on the synthesis, to look at work from, for example, Lumir Hanush, a publication from 2016 that really nicely explains how this conversion is done exactly. And I can send you a URL Jacquie, maybe for people who are interested in this, or people can also directly contact me. That's all fine. And there's some other interesting papers about that as well. Then there was one other thing that triggered me when you said it, but now I forgot about it.
If we can have Matt jump into the comment that he's interested in making on the Ninth Circuit Court.
Yeah, on the Ninth. So, you know, it's interesting is that and I don't want to bore all of you with sort of how courts go about interpreting statute, but traditionally, when there's ambiguity in a statute, because keep in mind here that the prevailing law is not just the Controlled Substances Act, it's also DEA regulations. And for a very long time, DEA regulations have specified that tetrahydrocannabinols, which include both Delta-8 and Delta-9, are controlled substances. And according to the DEA regs very specifically say that if it is synthetically derived, it is a controlled substance. Now, what the court did was the court basically, in order to avoid allowing the regulations to inform their interpretation of the statute, they declared that there was no statutory ambiguity, that it was perfectly plain on its face. And the truth of the matter is, as everyone knows, derivatives has no real exact scientific meaning, and that there's an inherent ambiguity there about what is confined by a derivative. It's the conversion of a chemical compound, or what did I have a definition here that I wrote down. It is a transformation of a chemical compound from a similar compound containing essential elements of the parent substance. It doesn't really say a whole hell of a lot. And you would think that under those circumstances that they would revert to advert, I should say, to the DEA regulations to inform the inquiry, but they did not do that. The other thing that the court was really intellectually dishonest about, there's an entirely other statute called the Federal Analog Act. And the Federal Analog Act basically bans anything that is substantially similar to something on the DEA list of scheduled substances. It has to be similar in its chemical structure, and it has to be similar in its physiological effect. And as Linda will tell you, Delta-8 and Delta-9 are virtually identical when it comes to their chemical structures. And Delta-8 produces a very, very similar hallucinogenic type effect or psychotropic type effect. So the court doesn't actually talk about the Drug Analog Act. And another principle of statutory construction is if you have two statutes and they conflict, as best as possible, you're supposed to read them in harmony with one another. So it's interesting is that there's the federal law where this ambiguity has been created. There is created this market of Delta-8, which seemingly the government never intended. But states have actually dealt with this problem much more readily, and I think in a much more effective fashion. What they do is they describe, and they've effectively created prohibitions on the creation of hemp-derived Delta-8. What they've done is, and New York has done this, they describe it as the isomerization process. And once again, I'll defer to Linda about what exactly that entirely means, but it's intended to close this loophole and basically say that you cannot isomerize any of the chemical extractions from a hemp plant and create Delta-8 or Delta-10 from them, another isomer of Delta-9. And it's the clarity in that language effectively eliminates this loophole that the federal government unintentionally opened.
Linda, did you think of what you wanted to have a question ready for you? Well, please.
Yeah, but it was, I saw questions, but I also remembered the thing that triggered me, which is entirely non-scientific. But you were making comments about, well, if you have discussions like those and you're going to make legislation, you need to have experts around the table.
Right.
And I agree, because then at least you can make decisions based on facts or on advice from people who actually know more about it. And that is, of course, not necessarily the intention of the people who make these regulations. As you can see, I live in Colorado, and medical cannabis here is regulated by the Department of Revenue, not by Department of Health, the Department of Revenue. So the Department of Revenue is the department that is responsible for the safety and the accessibility of these kind of medications for patients. So that said, I am on the Health and Safety Advisory Board for a government for a capital in the United States, for a city. And I'm not really looking at all these things. I'm not very, I don't know a lot about politics, but someone at the state and county said there will be a similar health and safety advisory committee for at state level. So, and we would like you to apply there because you have, good additions for such, and then, so I thought, okay, I will apply. And the question I had to answer was, why do you think you can help us? Something along those lines with health and safety around cannabinoids. So my response was, well, I've been doing this work for X years. I have a PhD in the matter. Here are my publications. I'm also on another health and safety advisory board. And yeah, just ask me anything else that you need to know. My application was rejected. And when I looked at the people who were on that board, they were mostly legal and marketing representatives from the industry. So yes, I think everybody knows what needs to happen, but that's not what, that's not apparently to people's benefits. People have different motivations than trying to do, I think, what is right. Namely, be there for the people who need it, for patients.
Right, patient safety, consumer safety, again, because you don't have to be a patient to get a hold of Delta-8, which then is a great segue to, in your paper, that they're all animal studies. This is an issue of, because cannabis, THC is federally illegal, there are studies and clinical research going on, but quite limited. And so does the studying and research of Delta-8 or these hemp-derived cannabinoids, does that serve as a bridge to when we can be ready, or that we will be ready for in the industry and research for Delta-9 and the THC?
So are you asking what we know about Delta-8?
No, I'm not asking what you know, but this is going to pointedly to innovation. Is this an opportunity to be able to do research on hemp-derived cannabinoids, that this can serve as a bridge and get some knowledge assets in place that when the federal regulatory standards change, that then we can research Delta-9 and learn from the experience of researching Delta-8.
So you're asking, with the knowledge that we have about Delta-8, can we extrapolate that to Delta-9?
Well, or yes, let's go there. Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So, well, one compound can never replace the other fully, of course. Mm-hmm. But in general, there are a lot of similarities between the compounds. They seem to be working mostly via the same mechanism of action, namely via the cannabinoid type 1 receptor, CB1, for most of the beneficial effects, so to say, because yes, cannabis has various compounds, hundreds of compounds, but even if you look at the comparison between THC and CBD, almost all the effects that people want to use cannabis for are because of THC and not necessarily of CBD. So therefore, I was specifically talking about the CB1 receptor in this regard. Mm-hmm. THC, Delta-9 THC is more potent, gives stronger effects at the CB1 receptor than Delta-8 THC. So yeah, you can work with certain conversion factors to make this translation, but nothing, of course, will fully be fully predictable, and there are still also some knowledge gaps that need to be bridged.
That is actually more succinctly is probably what I had meant, or part of what I meant was a knowledge gap. And again, doing some research with Delta-8, does that provide a basis? And so in your paper, you do mention possible therapeutic benefits of Delta-8. And would you speak to those?
Yeah, sure. So I must say that Delta-8 has not really been very, very thoroughly studied, not to the level that Delta-9 has been studied for therapeutic effects, especially in humans. So there is a lot of research on Delta-8 THC, specifically in vitro and in vivo research. And that is because Delta-8 is a more stable molecule. So what happened a few decades ago is that Delta-8 was actually studied a lot, and sometimes even more than Delta-9 THC, just because the molecule is easier to handle. Nowadays, of course, that makes less sense because you want to study what is actually being used by people, and that happens to be Delta-9 THC. But that said, we do have quite some knowledge gaps with regards to the therapeutic benefits of Delta-8 THC. But what we can state in general is that to achieve the same level of effect of Delta-9 THC, you need more Delta-8 THC. So it seems very likely that Delta-8 THC can be used for the same indications that Delta-9 THC is used for. There are some clues from animal research that Delta-8 THC could maybe have different effects for certain types of pain. But because this has not been verified in human studies, we cannot say that there's any evidence. But there are certainly interesting areas that could be further explored.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Mintz, with this discussion that we've had, and I know you've learned some about Delta-8, what would you say to a patient coming into your practice tomorrow? Has your opinion changed at all?
So it's evolving. It's hard. So when I first heard of this, I had concerns about the companies that were making Delta-8, about the extraction methods, and specifically some of the agents that are used in extraction can be toxic to the body. And because these are not pharmaceutical companies, what safety measures are put in? Are these independently verified by a third party? Initially in the market, the companies that were making these products were not something that I would consider safe. So my initial gut reaction is, no, this is not a good idea. If you really want, a product that's going to help, that's going to act like THC, let's get you the real THC and get you certified for medical cannabis. Because I know, in regulated medical cannabis, that it's highly regulated, very safe. So my initial reactions were, no, that's not a good idea. But things are changing. Some of the more, I don't want to say legitimate companies, but some of the companies that I have comfort with, that I know have good processes, that are third-party independent, that post their lab results online, are starting to dive into this Delta-8, Delta-9 stuff. And in that case, I'm a little bit more open to it. So to me, it's about, it's about anything. Like with any prescription, whether it's a cholesterol medicine or a high blood pressure medicine, it's all about safety and efficacy. Is this product going to treat your condition, and is it going to be safe? And the same thing can be applied to Delta-8 and Delta-9. What's changing is the safety factor, and that's changing. It's a moving target. So I'm still pretty cautious. I'd still rather them get, Delta-9 and like products from a medical cannabis dispensary, but my needle has moved, continues to move day by day as new information and new products come out.
This is why we need research, so that physicians and healthcare providers have access for evidence-based medicine. And there are companies in the US and in Canada, I know, and in the EU, who are making API cannabinoids, those are active pharmaceutical ingredients, and working on some unique product formulation. So I think this conversation is fascinating. I think, Steve, if you're there, let's open it up to the Q&A. I'm curious.
Sure. There are a number of questions, some of which I believe have been answered in the most recent discussion. But I think it goes to one of the questions: what is the danger with Delta-8 or their products? I mean, it seems like it's a naturally arriving component. What is the true danger of it?
And Steve, I'd invite you to come on camera.
Okay.
So, Dr. Mintz, I don't know if you want to handle that answer. I can elaborate on your answer too.
Right, so I'll start from the clinical standpoint. So, so Delta-8 as a pure molecule, by itself, there's concerns, just like there is concerns for Delta-9, for cannabis-derived Delta-9, that it can be sedating, it can be impairing, in high doses can cause anxiety. So I'm comfortable with that. That's fine, but it's not like, just because it's derived from a natural product doesn't, there are concerns about Delta-9, marijuana, or cannabis derived Delta-9. So that aside, there are additional concerns about Delta-8 because of the extraction process, because the companies that are making it, because I don't know what other ingredient, are there contaminants in the processing that are going to be in the product? That's one. Is the dosing correct? How many milligrams? You want to be accurate about the milligrams. I know, for example, a 5 milligram gummy that I have a patient take from a medical cannabis dispensary has 5 milligrams of THC. If a hemp-derived product from Delta that has Delta-8 THC in it, if it says 5 milligrams, how do I know that it's 5 milligrams? How can I be assured? I know how I know that dose. So there's a dose consistency issue with it. There's a safety issue based on the way it's extracted and qualified. So that's an issue too. The other issue also, and again, I have mixed feelings about this, is, some drugs I prescribe, and there's a reason why drugs are prescriptions. Some drugs are over the counter. Some drugs are behind the counter. Some drugs patients go in without a doctor recommendation. And so there's concern about that, about they see hemp and they think it's safe, and they drive taking a Delta-8 or a hemp-derived Delta-8 or Delta-9 product, and they think it's okay because it's from hemp, so it's not going to make me high, and they get in a car accident. So there's that issue as well. So there's a lot of different issues which need to be addressed. Doesn't mean that it's not a good idea. We just have to look at both the pros and the cons and find out what's the best for the patient and the public.
Right. Thank you.
I was just going to add.
So
Steve, I was just going to add to that. I can't comment on the dangers of Delta-8. Obviously, Dr. Mintz has already done so. One of the things that I think it's important to note is that there have been studies, people have randomly taken the Delta-8 products that are derived from hemp off the shelves. And what they've discovered, apart from the fact that there's no independent lab testing, is that many of these products contain heavy metals, pesticides, and chemical byproducts that are in themselves toxic, because the process to convert CBD into Delta-8 can very often use a catalyst like sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid, inorganic substances that are also toxic.
Yeah.
Oh, Linda, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that a researcher from Oregon, he's now in New York, actually recently wrote an article about that and analyzed these substances. He bought 27 products from 10 different brands and found that none of them had the right labeling on it with regards to Delta-8. And all of them had compounds there that shouldn't have been there and were not on the label. And this is a 2022 publication by Yirish Mihan Atrash. So I can recommend reading his article if anyone wants to know more about these substances that Matthew Schweber was just talking about.
Yeah, and then hosted on CannabizMD.com on the site is a white paper published by ASTM and their D37 on consumer protection, consumer safety, and how critical industry best standards are to create these products. When I first came across Delta-8, I know, Linda, you and I had a conversation where I think it goes back to 1940s. I had found something that referenced some guys on the eastern shore of Maryland, not far from where I am, they use petroleum to extract. And so would you, throw down some petroleum? I mean, this is what you have to be mindful of. This is why you you look for product testing, certificates of analysis, the COAs. Steve?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's right. In fact, it leads to another question that is, are there any reputable Delta-8 companies out there? And I think, Matt, you had said something earlier about the choice that you made around Delta-8, because as Linda said, it's more stable. So are there companies out there that are reputable that people can find?
I mean, so look, I'm a cannabis lawyer, so naturally I direct people to the cannabis industry. It's what I know best. But yes, I have a client who is responsible for creating a product that's sold in marijuana dispensaries. It's called the Level Pro Tab. They create a Level Pro Tab that consists of Delta-8 isolate. I know that it undergoes independent laboratory testing in order to pass in California and to be sold in stores. I can't speak for any of the hemp-derived Delta-8 because I advise people not to use it.
Thank you.
So it's the cannabis-derived Delta-8, most likely
Correct.
in a state where that is legal.
Correct, where it's an adult use product. It's largely in California right now.
Right, got it. So I guess another question that came up was, as a synthetic, can you overdose on it, or can death be caused by it? I'd love to open that up to anybody else other than myself.
I can take a one, but go ahead.
Yes, Linda,
No,
please.
go ahead.
Okay, so because I saw that question was talking about synthetic cannabinoids in the general sense, and I know that the word synthetic cannabinoids has a very negative connotation because of publications about what has happened with people using synthetic cannabinoids. Think of hundreds of deaths in Europe a few years ago, of the zombie outbreak in New York, all these kind of things. So there is a very negative connotation. Synthetic does not necessarily mean that a cannabinoid is dangerous because it is synthetic. So if you take, for example, plant-derived Delta-9 THC, synthetic Delta-9 THC is not more dangerous than the plant-derived one. I think there are two very important points to make with regards to synthetic cannabinoids. The one thing is something that was already mentioned here by Matthew Schweber, by Matthew Mintz, and that is the byproducts. So if we are talking here about synthetic cannabinoids like K2 spice, etc., that people get from the petrol station, then what they're buying is something that is uncontrolled, untested. You don't know what is in there. Actually, it has been shown that these products can contain very dangerous doses of certain compounds that shouldn't be in there, but also very badly formulated synthetic cannabinoids. So you don't know what you're buying, you don't know what's in there, and what is on the label is not necessarily reflecting what is in the product. So that is the first major problem. And then the second problem is that we are talking here about cannabinoids, Fubinaca, JWH18, etc., that are not clinically studied in humans. So this means there was a comparable case with a Fa inhibitor, and Fa is the enzyme that breaks down your endogenous cannabinoids. This was tested in a clinical trial in France, but there the mistake was made that there was not a good translation in going up in the dose. And what happened was studied actually in a lab in the Netherlands, that this compound that seemed so innocent, so to say, was having off-target effects at different proteins. So if you have a cannabinoid that binds to the CB1 receptor, it doesn't mean that that's the only thing they do. They might very well also go elsewhere and bind elsewhere and have other effects. So these are two issues. One, you don't know what you're getting outside of the cannabinoids, and the other thing is you get a cannabinoid but you don't know actually what it's doing. So there are more things, but I think these are the two most important ones. So back to the question, can you die of an overdose? Potentially, but not necessarily Delta-8. That is not what we are talking about when we talk about synthetic cannabinoids.
I think we have time for one more question.
Do we have? Yes, we do.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So would it be better to decriminalize Delta-9 THC so that people could use the natural molecule versus where we currently are today? So that's an interesting forward-looking legal question.
So my answer would be, it would be wonderful if the entire cannabis plant was removed from the Controlled Substances Act, but keep this in mind. Simply because you remove it from the Controlled Substances Act doesn't mean that it's not subject to federal regulation. Currently, CBD is not scheduled, so it's not prohibited by the Controlled Substances Act, but the FDA, because of the FFDC Act, currently prohibits its use in beverages and in edibles. So simply removing it is only part of the solution to the question.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. Jacquie?
All right. Well, it is a wrap. I know we could keep on going. I'm looking at the time. So thank you to Dr. Mintz, Matt Schweber, and Linda Klumpers for joining us. This video, as I said at the very beginning, is being recorded. If folks want to reach out to you, I'll send an email I'll get that when we're done. And if the folks are interested in connecting with you on a one-to-one, Dr. Mintz, Matt, and Linda, if that works for you. And yeah, and so then moving on to our next slides, we're wrapping up our program. And Steve, I think, is this on you?
Here we go. Here we go.
Yeah.
So just to recall everyone that we have the Foundations program essentially in cannabis science and policy for businesses, for practitioners to help with their team. Anyone's interested, we'd love to talk to you more about that for your group and organization. The additional slides coming forward, Jacquie, I'll let you address so we can explain a little bit more about some of the other sister social
Sure. And
enterprises.
while those are coming up, those slides are coming up, is that I think, a critical takeaway from this conversation is testing, standards, industry standards, best practices, law. This is why there are regulations in place to keep patients and consumers safe. And again, benefiting for optimal patient outcomes. So this is another program that we have upcoming. September seems like far away, but while you're working on these, it is around the corner. So this is the third annual CannabizMD Cannabis Science and Policy Forum, the first two of which were virtual. So this one will be hybrid so that we can maximize opportunities for the audience to join us wherever they are on the globe. We are going to be based at the University of Maryland Biopark, which is right on the campus of the University of Maryland Clinical Professional Schools. So that's where the medical school is, the dental school, the school of pharmacy, and the nursing school. So reach out to me, more information, and Steve as well, whether if you'd like to participate as a sponsor in that. Again, you're going to be getting information on how to join us and the different ways to do that. And then mentioned at the beginning of the video is, and folks who are familiar with my work, is that I'm also the founder and CEO of the Cannabis Industry Networking Group named TPAD. And to give everybody a foundation of what the history of TPADs were, is they were actually using in vernacular weed speakeasies in the 1920s and 30s, where American jazz was born, and these launched in New York, Harlem, and Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday. And I borrowed that name, and at every TPAD, I can guarantee you, after launching May 2019 and hosted in Maryland, New Jersey, DC, is we have live jazz, we have good eats, we have plentiful libations spelled wrong, and provocative conversation. And so following up the forum, we're actually going to have a TPAD that night in Baltimore. So those folks that are in the Maryland, DC, Northern Virginia, hope to join you. And we are focused on raising money and finding corporate partners to work with TPAD, the TPAD Fellowship Program, which will deliver cannabis science and policy education foundation to our fellows, and then they will then transition to be working as a paid extern with a corporate partner in the cannabis industry, whether it's plant touching or an ancillary service provider, so that we at TPAD are executing our mission to break down barriers to advancement and entry into the cannabis industry via education, again, no matter gender or race. So again, if you're interested in partnering with TPAD, please follow up with me. And I think this is a wrap. So contact info for myself and Steve, and then again, you're going to be getting follow-up emails. Love to hear your response on a survey that you're going to be getting about the response. Everything from how manageable was Eventbrite to you to Zoom, suggestions for our content, and interest in working with us in the future. So that's it. And again, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Who, as an attendee, I truly hope that you were inspired and that you gained greater knowledge about medical cannabis and the science and the therapeutics and innovation. What is happening in the industry is, again, as I said, it's a rocket ship. So Dr. Mintz, thank you so much. Matt Schweber, Linda Klumpers, Milan, who's behind the scenes. Thank you, managing Zoom, and of course, my colleague, Steve. So everybody have a good night.
Thank you.